In my last Sew With Me video, I received a couple of comments saying how they would love to have the pattern to sew along. I decided that it would be nice this week to make something from a commercial pattern company. So if you wanted, you could go out and buy it and give it a go. I found this pattern called the Davenport Dress by the Friday Pattern Company and decided to give it a try. I've never used this pattern producer before, but all the reviews were great and I saw that they had a ton of online learning resources to help along with the instructions. What I also loved was that the models they used to advertise the patterns really showed their sizing range was very inclusive, which I like to see. The fitting of a garment on the smallest size is always going to look different to the largest size. Everyone should be represented and be able to see a clear picture of what they are buying to make an informed choice. I just got a really good feel of this brand at this point, so I bought a PDF copy and gave it a go. As far as sizing, I graded up 2 sizes on the skirt from the bodice and waist. I selected my sizing based off the end garment measurements rather than the body measurements. That's how I always work, as I find you get a better idea of the end fit. Thumbs up to every company who provides a table of both. I recently bought a wool mix fabric in this lovely blue-grey plaid print. It has an almost flannel feel to it, quite a thick feel and warm. I wasn't sure if it would be too thick given all the gathers, but I thought I could adjust it to make it work if not. As I was cutting a pattern fabric, I needed to cut flat, but the pattern instructions actually suggested cutting this flat anyway. You don't see that much, but a lot of the pieces are placed on the fold, so I'm figuring that is why. Another neat thing I liked to hear was the ruffle dimensions were provided, so you could select whether to print and cut or just cut the ruffle rectangles directly on your fabric. I find the process of forming rectangles really tedious and a waste of paper, so this was another big thumbs up for this pattern company. The instructions were really clear. None of the techniques were new to me, but if you are a beginner sewer or someone looking for support, then you can certainly get them here. I didn't even look at the extra resources they provide on their site. They also had emails included in the pattern instructions to get in touch direct for help. So if you've been intimidated by commercial sewing patterns before, this would be a great option for you. You begin with the waist tie, which I found peculiar but helpful, as I had the hesitation that my fabric may be too thick and causing some bulking on this garment. You can see when I turned the waist tie the right way round, it was a process. It must have taken me 20 minutes to feed it through itself, but it did fit through. So at this point I was more confident that it would work. If the tube worked, then the rest should. I already had a plan B to use elastic if the tube wouldn't turn, but it was nice for that to be a success. The elasticated neckline is constructed inside of a facing. Once again, you're threading something through a tube using a safety pin. This time, it's much shorter than the previous tube. There is quite a lot of top stitching on the end garment with this project in order to create the channels needed for the elastic and the waistband tie. I used a matched in thread so the lines blend in, but it could look good with a contrast thread on a plain fabric. Forming the bodice is actually a really nice process using shoulder and back yokes. So all your edges are trapped within, meaning you don't need to overlock or zigzag the edges much at all to begin. The neckline is also completed really early, with all clean lines, so you can put this on and pin the edges to check the fit. I loved how all the seam allowance around the neckline and shoulders completely disappeared. This fabric I'm using frays quite easily, so with a finish like this you just know the insides will remain as neat as the outside. The neckline looked really small at this point. I worried I'd cut the wrong size, but it was simply the elastic front making it appear smaller than expected. The back yoke is probably the first place you would run into problems if you're new to yokes, but the instructions are clear, defining the sections from each other. You first attach your back to your outer back yoke, so that is your back yoke that is visible when worn. Once you've done that, you are doing the burrito method, placing everything inside of itself to attach the inside yoke on the same seam. I have a tutorial on the burrito method here to look at this in more depth if you're interested. I also imagine the Friday Pattern Company will include this step in their videos to refer to also. Next, the sleeves are made. I was undecided at this point if I wanted to add the frills at the shoulders, and also if I wanted full length or 3/4 sleeves. I decided, as this was my first time making the pattern, to make it as it is, and then I could always go back and remove or cut them down. You can't put fabric back on, but you can cut it away. Frills are gathered using a double basting stitch and added to the arm sky whilst the bodice is still flat. This allows you to take your time and ensure all the gathers are evenly distributed across the front and back. Before the sleeves are formed, the cuffs are prepared for hemming later. This is done by forming the folds of the hem and pressing them. Later, when in a tube form, we can use these precise folds to get a straight edge. The sleeves are attached to the shoulder, and then the side seams of the bodice are closed up. I usually do this on knit garments, but it is a more beginner-friendly method than doing a set-in sleeve, especially with all these extra layers with the yokes and the ruffles. From this point, the raw edges of your project are all exposed, so need finishing. I used an overlocker. You could use a zigzag stitch on your regular machine instead. You could even create French seams in areas for a clean internal finish. The elasticated cuffs have a ruffled edge and it's all formed together. I really like this method and thought it was simple to achieve. Sometimes completing the seams of elastic channels once the elastic is inside them can be hard work. You end up trapping the elastic in your stitches and it affects the function of the cuff. Here you had lots of clearance and you could really see and feel what you were sewing as you worked. Here we have a fully formed bodice. You could hack this very easily into just a top by cutting the front and back longer by a few inches to your tastes. The pockets are formed first on the skirt front. The pocket facing I actually cut from this cotton I had in my stash. Because my fabric is thick, I was worried about having 3 layers of wool in the pocket area, plus all the seam allowances are doubled up too. I used this thinner, light stable fabric on the part you won't see to account for that. I didn't pattern match my pocket backs to my skirt front, as I wanted it to be visible that the two areas were different. If you wanted the pockets to appear invisible, you would ensure the pattern continued flush in this area from the skirt front. The skirt front is then matched to the skirt back. The edge is finished. You only have a 1 cm seam allowance with this pattern. That is one thing that I found a little bit annoying. I usually work with a 1.5 cm seam allowance. It just gives you a little adjustment room, and also if you have any fraying in construction, it gives you something to cut away. I love the idea of clothes being able to adjust with you, where that is weight gain or weight loss. So including extra fabric in your seam allowance to let clothes out if you need it can save you a lot of money buying or making new clothes in the future. The fit of this dress is very forgiving with the drawstring and all the elastic and gathers. But if you want that extra seam allowance, it's very easy to just draw the extra space on before you cut your paper pattern. The drawstring case is attached along the top of the skirt. Here I did pattern match. An alternative option here would have been to cut it on the bias, as that would have looked a good contrast with the plaid pattern to define the area and split the dress centrally. The skirt is then joined to the bodice. Again, I pattern match so my vertical lines carried from my neck to my hem. The drawstring is thread through the tunnel. Once again, this took me the better part of an eternity due to the thickness of my drawstring, but it did go through. I finished the ends by folding them over twice and sewing, rather than the knot as suggested. I was worried my fabric would fray like that. I was then able to fit my dress to me. The last step for me was to attach the ruffle. I cut the ruffle 5 centimetres deeper than the pattern stated. I wanted more length than was shown on the model pictures. However, on completion, I actually don't think I needed it and I may cut it down. The ruffle is made into a loop. I adjusted the ruffle into 2 longer rectangles rather than 4 shorter ones. This just eliminated the centre front and centre back seam. I hemmed the ruffle before gathering it. It's so much easier to work with like that. Pressing up hems on a regular ironing board can be hard because sometimes you're fighting with keeping the weight of the garment on the board while still having plenty of room to work on the hem. The only drawback to this method is that sometimes the fabric can stretch out when you hang it up and you can get an uneven hem. Because this fabric is cut from rectangles on the same grain line, this is likely to occur in quite an even manner. What usually happens if part of the fabric that is on the bias will stretch out and the rest will stay relatively as it is. That's why you tend to get a wobbled hem on a circular or full skirt. If it was to drop, it's not a huge issue. You can just unpick your hem, level it off and redo it. This was a really long ruffle to gather down evenly. If I did this step again, I would sew 4 sections of basting stitch, 1 for each quarter. Then I can match the centre points and the side seams and pull it down between in each section. Here it is. I really like the fit and it's very easy to wear. Things I would change if I made it again is that I would consider making this waistband elastic like the cuffs and the neckline. I may even do that on this by feeding the elastic in and then attaching the ties at the front area here as a faux tie. It's not a major change and that's a preference of mine rather than a pattern problem. I would also like to make a sleeveless version of this in a lightweight cotton for the summer. I can see it being a really nice wear and cool. All in all, I'm really impressed with the Davenport Dress and the Friday Pattern Company. I'm going to look at some of the other patterns now and see if anything else is missing from my wardrobe. If you have liked today's video and would like to see more, then please like and subscribe to stay notified of new content. I make sewing tutorials for all levels and sew with me's like today to inspire. Happy sewing!